Subscribe to Life Stories to begin today's journey. What happens when greed, betrayal, and karma collide? Avery's world was turned upside down when her sister, Lindsay, and her ex-husband, Nathan, conspired to steal her inheritance using lies, manipulation, and even the legal system to paint her as unstable. But what they didn't know was that their grandmother had foreseen everything, leaving behind a secret that would change the game. In a story of justice, resilience, and unexpected consequences, Avery turns the tables and reclaims what was rightfully hers. Subscribe to Life Stories to start today's story. The cafe was crowded when Avery walked in, her steps measured, her posture composed, as if she had rehearsed this moment. She had always carried herself with quiet dignity, but today, something in her manner suggested she was bracing for impact. The air was filled with the scent of fresh coffee and buttery croissants, and the hum of conversations layered over the gentle clinking of cutlery. She spotted Lindsay immediately. Her sister had always possessed an effortless confidence, the kind that made people turn their heads when she entered a room. Today was no exception. Lindsay sat near the window, bathed in the soft glow of afternoon light, her blonde hair perfectly styled, her lips painted in a shade of red that Avery recognized from their mother's old vanity set. She was poised, elegant, and, as always, dangerous. Avery took a deep breath and walked over, sliding into the seat across from Lindsay. The moment she sat down, Lindsay lifted her left hand, angling it so that the diamond on her finger caught the light. It wasn't just any diamond, it was their grandmother Eleanor's engagement ring, a piece of family history that was never meant to be hers. "Thanks for meeting me," Lindsay said, her voice laced with an artificial sweetness that Avery had learned to recognize long ago. "I wanted you to be the first to know Nathan and I are getting married." Avery felt her stomach tighten at the mention of Nathan's name. Even after everything, hearing it still sent a pang through her chest. He had once been her husband, the man she had trusted, loved, and built a life with. And now, here he was, preparing to marry the very person who had spent a lifetime taking everything that was once hers. She willed herself to stay calm. "Congratulations," she said evenly, wrapping her hands around her coffee cup to steady them. Lindsay leaned back, eyes glittering with amusement. "I see you've noticed the ring." She extended her hand again, letting the antique diamond sparkle between them. Avery nodded. "Grandmother's ring." Her voice remained neutral, but inside, she was unraveling. Lindsay gave a small laugh, as if amused by Avery's naivety. "Oh, this old thing? Well, since Nathan helped me contest the will, it's mine now, along with the house and the trust fund." She took a sip of her latte, letting the words sink in before adding, "Funny how things work out, isn't it?" Avery's mind flashed back to her last conversation with grandmother Eleanor. Just days before she passed, they had been in Eleanor's study, surrounded by old books and framed photographs of their family through the decades. Eleanor had handed Avery a worn leather journal, her hands frail but steady. "Keep this safe," she had whispered. "Everything you need to know is in here. Promise me, Avery. Wait for the right moment." At the time, Avery hadn't fully understood what she meant. But now, sitting across from Lindsay, watching her parade around stolen wealth, she wondered if this was the moment Eleanor had been waiting for. "You know what's really funny?" Lindsay continued, stirring her drink with a slow, deliberate motion. "How easy it was to convince the lawyers that you were mentally unstable." She smiled, savoring the words. "A few tearful statements from Nathan about your little episodes during your marriage. Some carefully edited photos." The judge practically handed everything over. Avery's grip on her coffee cup tightened. She knew exactly what Lindsay was referring to. The episodes were panic attacks, moments of sheer anxiety that had plagued her after discovering Nathan's affairs, which, she now realized, had included Lindsay all along. They had twisted her pain into a weapon. For years, Avery had been the steady one, the responsible one. Lindsay had been the reckless sister, the one who took without thinking, who manipulated situations to her advantage. But this time, she had gone too far. Avery took a slow breath. "Why did you ask me here, Lindsay?" she asked, keeping her voice controlled. "Just to gloat?" Lindsay leaned in slightly, her eyes narrowing with something close to pity. "Oh, no, dear sister. I actually wanted to offer you a deal." Avery lifted an eyebrow. "Sign away any future claims to the estate," Lindsay said, tilting her head. "And I'll give you a small monthly allowance. Just enough to keep you from ending up on the streets. After all," she added with a saccharine smile, "we are family." Avery sat back, studying her sister. Really studying her. Lindsay had always played the part of the golden child, the one who could charm her way through anything. But beneath the designer clothes and the carefully curated image, there was something Avery had never truly noticed before: fear. Fear of losing. Fear of being exposed. And suddenly, Avery realized something. Lindsay had no idea about grandmother Eleanor's journal. She reached for her bag, her fingers brushing against the worn leather cover. "You're right," she said softly. "We are family." Lindsay's expression wavered. "What does that mean?" Avery placed the journal on the table between them. "And there's something you should know about grandmother's real estate." Lindsay frowned. "We've been through all the paperwork. Everything's in my name now." Avery flipped the journal open to a marked page. "Not everything." For the first time that afternoon, Lindsay's confidence faltered. "Did you know?" Avery continued, voice steady, "that grandmother kept a second set of books?" A pause. Lindsay's fingers tightened around her coffee cup. "You're lying." Avery slid a stack of photocopied documents across the table. "The lawyers found everything." "Did they?" she asked. "Because according to this, grandmother's most valuable assets were moved into a separate trust 2 weeks before she died. A trust that requires both sisters to agree on any distribution of funds." Lindsay paled as she scanned the documents, her manicured nails pressing into the pages. Avery could almost see her mind racing, calculating the consequences. "That's impossible," Lindsay whispered. "Nathan checked everything." Avery gave a small, knowing smile. "Nathan doesn't know about this," she said. "Neither do the lawyers. Grandmother made sure of that." She leaned in, lowering her voice just slightly. "She knew how you operated. She was just waiting to see how far you'd go." Lindsay swallowed, her bravado slipping. "You're bluffing." Avery reached for her phone, her fingers dialing a number she had memorized. "Why don't we ask Mr. Chen?" she said, her voice calm. "He's the trustee grandmother appointed. I'm sure he'd be happy to verify everything." Lindsay's composure cracked completely. "Wait," she said quickly, reaching for Avery's hand. Let's discuss this." Avery ended the call before it connected, enjoying the flash of realization in Lindsay's eyes. "Oh, now you want to talk?" she asked, tilting her head. "What happened to all that confidence from earlier?" Lindsay opened her mouth, but no words came out. For the first time in their lives, Avery had the upper hand. Lindsay's hand was still outstretched, hovering in the space between them, as if she could physically pull back everything that had just been said. But Avery didn't give her that chance. She watched as her sister's manicured fingers curled slightly, trembling just enough for Avery to notice. It was a strange thing, seeing Lindsay at a loss for words. For as long as Avery could remember, her sister had always been in control, whether it was their parents' favor, social circles, or, now, even Avery's own inheritance. But something had shifted. Lindsay had always assumed she was the smartest person in the room. And for once, she was wrong. "Sit back down, Lindsay," Avery said, her voice steady. Lindsay hesitated for a split second before sinking into her chair, her posture noticeably less composed. She picked up her spoon and stirred her coffee, though it was clear her hands were moving just to keep them occupied. What do you want? She asked finally, her voice quieter than before. Avery exhaled slowly. I want you to understand what's about to happen, she said, tapping the leather journal gently. Everything you thought you owned, the house, the trust fund, even grandmother's most valuable investments, they were never really yours. Lindsay scoffed. But there was no confidence behind it. You're bluffing. Avery ignored the weak attempt at defiance. Grandmother knew you'd try something like this. That's why she set up the second trust. It doesn't matter what papers you forged, what false testimony you gave in court, none of it overrides this. She pushed the photocopies toward Lindsay, watching as her sister's eyes darted over the documents, her breathing becoming more uneven. The original assets were transferred 2 weeks before grandmother passed. Avery continued. You contested a will that had already been stripped of its most valuable holdings. The accounts you gained control of? They're a shell of what you thought they were. Lindsay's fingers tightened around the pages. She looked up. And for the first time since Avery had walked into the cafe, she saw something raw in her sister's expression. Not just anger. Not just frustration, but fear. Nathan checked everything, Lindsay said again. But this time it was less of a statement and more of a desperate plea for reassurance. Avery leaned forward. Nathan doesn't know about this, she said. Neither do the lawyers. Lindsay's jaw clenched. If this were true, I would have known. Avery tilted her head slightly. Would you? She asked. Or did you just assume that because you got away with so much before, you'd get away with this too? For a long moment, there was silence between them. The cafe's background noise felt distant, muffled by the weight of the conversation. Then Lindsay laughed. Short and humorless. She pushed the papers back toward Avery. This doesn't change anything, she said. You think I'm scared? Even if what you're saying is true, you can't prove I did anything illegal. Avery studied her sister for a long moment, then slowly pulled out her phone. You think I can't prove it? She asked. Let's find out. She dialed a number and held the phone to her ear. Lindsay's breath hitched. Who are you calling? Mr. Chen. Avery said simply. Grandmother's trustee. He's been waiting for this call. Lindsay's expression flickered between rage and panic. Wait, she said, reaching for Avery's wrist. Let's talk about this. Avery let the call ring for a few more seconds. Just long enough for Lindsay to fully grasp that this time, she wasn't in control. Then, just before Mr. Chen picked up, Avery ended the call. Lindsay exhaled sharply, relief flickering across her face before it hardened into something defensive. Oh, now you want to talk? Avery asked, arching an eyebrow. What happened to all that confidence from earlier? Lindsay's mouth opened, then closed. For the first time in her life, she had no answer. Avery could almost hear Lindsay's mind racing, scrambling for an exit, a way to twist the situation back in her favor. But there was no easy escape this time. For years, Lindsay had perfected the art of manipulation, bending reality to suit her needs. She had learned early that a well-placed tear or a carefully calculated lie could get her anything she wanted. And for the longest time, it had worked. Until now. Avery leaned back in her chair, watching as her sister gripped the edges of the photocopied documents like a lifeline. Lindsay's carefully crafted composure was cracking, and Avery wasn't going to let her rebuild it. You don't understand, Lindsay muttered, her voice barely above a whisper. Nathan and we've already spent some of the money. We've made commitments. Avery tilted her head slightly. Commitments. Lindsay swallowed hard. And for the first time, there was something almost human in her expression. A flicker of doubt. Of regret. The house in Manhattan, she admitted. The cars. The engagement party at the Drake. We thought everything was solid. Avery let the silence stretch between them. She could feel Lindsay's desperation. Her quiet panic at realizing that the fortune she and Nathan had so easily spent was never truly theirs to begin with. What do you want? Avery? Lindsay's voice broke the silence. And this time, there was no more arrogance, only fear. Avery studied her sister. Really studied her. Behind the designer clothes and the perfect makeup, there was something she had never fully seen before, a woman who had built her entire life on taking from others. Never once thinking about what would happen when there was nothing left to steal. What I want, Avery said slowly, is for you to think about what's going to happen when Nathan finds out there's no money left. Lindsay paled, her fingers tightening around the papers. When he realizes that marrying you won't give him access to grandmother's fortune. Avery continued. When the man who helped you steal from me, who lied about me in court, realizes that you have nothing left to offer him. Lindsay's breath hitched. You wouldn't, she whispered. But Avery could see the terror creeping into her eyes. Avery smiled, though there was no warmth in it. Wouldn't I? Lindsay's entire body went rigid. And for the first time, she looked truly, completely afraid. Avery stood, grabbing her bag and slipping the journal back inside. This conversation is over, she said simply. She turned to leave. But Lindsay's voice stopped her. He'll leave me, she said. The words barely audible. Avery turned back, meeting her sister's wide, stricken eyes. Probably, she agreed, her voice calm. Just like he left me when he thought something better came along. Lindsay let out a shaky breath, her grip on the documents trembling. Funny how history repeats itself, isn't it? Avery added. And with that, she walked out of the cafe, leaving Lindsay alone with the truth she had spent her whole life trying to outrun. Avery stood by the window of her grandmother's house, her house now, watching the golden afternoon light spill across the old oak trees. The house felt different, lighter, as if Eleanor's spirit could finally rest. Lindsay and Nathan had crumbled under the weight of their own deception. The trust had ensured they wouldn't be left destitute. But they had lost what they valued most, control. Their engagement quietly dissolved. And Lindsay disappeared from Chicago, too ashamed to face the world she had once ruled. Avery, meanwhile, had found peace. She honored Eleanor's legacy by turning the estate into a foundation, providing scholarships to young women who, like her, had been underestimated. Slipping Eleanor's ring onto her finger, Avery smiled. Justice had been served not through revenge, but through resilience. Some losses are blessings in disguise. Subscribe to Life Stories for more real-life lessons and powerful stories.